Night owls, what's the creepiest thing you heard at night? This happened to me a few years ago. In January, I was at a movie theater and got my backpack stolen. It had a spare key to my apartment in it. It also had an old credit card statement with my address. Fast forward to September and I want to watch the movie Joker, but I'm stuck at work on a Friday night and it is too late to watch. So I reluctantly go home. It is around 10 p.m., not really night owl times, and I'm watching Dateline on NBC about someone being murdered. I'm not really paying attention to it, but I can hear someone outside walking closer towards my apartment, and they are dragging something heavy. Then I hear the storm door open, so now I'm confused, but I assume it must be my landlord. But what does he want at 10 p.m.? I expect a knock on the door, but I don't hear a knock. Instead, I hear a key insert into the lock and the doorknob turn. Fortunately, I had my landlord replace the key 2 days after my backpack was stolen. The key didn't work and I heard them quickly run away after they discovered it was the wrong key or wrong door. Has anyone made a deal with a friend that if they weren't married by a certain age they would marry one another and actually followed through? How did it go? My grandparents were best friends with another couple before/during World War II. The two boyfriends, later husbands, were pilots in the Royal Canadian Air Force. And they had always agreed that if something happened to the other, that the surviving one would take care of the other one's girl, and basically not leave one of them to be a single widow with no help, I guess. Well, they both survived the war, but my grandparents' friend's wife passed away some time after the war of cancer. He remained very close friends with my grandparents. When my grandfather passed away in the late 1970s, my grandmother married the surviving friend. They were married for many happy years and took care of one another until his death. It wasn't until I was like 10 years old that I found out this man, who I lovingly also call Grandpa, wasn't my grandfather by blood, but instead was the best friend of my late grandfather. Grandma is still kicking. She's 96 now. Overthinkers of Reddit, what unlikely scenario actually came true that you were completely prepared for because you are an overthinker? I'm Asian, so my default is to overthink, especially when I'm on a field trip/holiday/etc. One time, while I was living in another sea country, I went on a middle school field trip with my, mostly white, classmates. Side note, in most sea public bathrooms, bidets are the norm, toilet paper is not. But in this particular country, even the bidets are not encouraged to be used. So toilet paper is a luxury during trips. At the hotel we stayed at, my classmates made fun of me for taking 3 rolls of toilet paper from the hotel's bathroom. They were embarrassed and reported me to the teacher in charge, who told them off for wasting her time. I told them they were going to regret laughing at me, but they continued to mock me for overthinking. Cue to the bus trip back, and a couple of them had diarrhea, and guess who was the only one able to provide enough toilet paper? You bet your ass I made them pay me for toilet paper, per square cause. Fuck you guys for laughing at me. People of Reddit, what's the dumbest or weirdest thing you've done while drunk? Drove up to a valley and shot with a blank gun. On the way down I rolled down the window, sat with half my body outside and blasted a mag into the air. Some random dude came driving up the valley, didn't see the shooting, only heard it and called the cops. Cue a gas station stop later and we got into a felony stop with many adrenaline-fueled cops. Friend got the barrel of an MP5 shoved into his neck whilst he was laying on gravel. Everyone else laying outside the car with many armed cops, 12 or so, around. Smartass me complied and assisted the cops with locating the gun. Everything was within the law. Lol. One mental breakdown, loads of alcohol, and a year later I won in court. Dumbfuck DA tried and failed big time, dropped the charge that would have stuck since I complied. The witness, the cops and me were all very puzzled that the case even went to the courts. This all happened in Norway and not America. We got guns here too. People who take walks at night. What's the scariest thing you've seen? During winter in a rural no cell service kind of area. Completely dark, no street lights nor anyone in sight. Temperatures were around 20 and it was snowing. I was walking my dog with a flashlight. Then I heard someone start screaming bloody murder. Flight or fight kicked in. It truly sounded like someone was being stabbed to death for what seemed like forever. I chose to find out what the hell was going on. What I found instead was beyond anything I expected. He was a 5-year-old boy wandering down the road all alone. All he was wearing were light flannel pants and a thin t-shirt. No shoes or hat. And screaming so loudly it echoed through the hills. I dropped my dog's leash and walked up to him slowly, gently and repeatedly telling him that I'm a mom and that he's going to be okay. I wrapped him into my arms and carried him to a neighbor's home to warm him by the fire and called for help. Later we found out that his parents had abandoned him that night and were never found. Those of you who live in small towns, what is the current local controversy all about? Not current, but it needs to be documented in history, the serial catnapper. A couple lost their cat, so they went knocking door to door in our town, and came across their cat crying in her random home's front window. They call the police, who arrive and find 50 plus missing cats, along with a fucking graveyard of cats in the garden. Some that had been missing for up to 7 years. It culminated in the catnapper, a 50-plus-year-old woman, stuffing as many cats as she could in a car and going on a police chase through our little town and getting caught within 10 minutes of a chase. Most of the cats were identified and taken home. A very small few went to rescue centers, from which I adopted 2 of them, and the catnapper is currently going under mental health treatment in the nearby hospital. Apparently she just took home any cat she saw while on a walk for the last 7 years and just kept them for herself. This happened about a couple years back, but I had to tell the tale. I think I'll write a book about it. Those who have been to a ruined wedding, what happened? I'm a wedding photographer. I was at one. A really fancy one a couple of years ago, typical outdoor deal at a swanky location in the middle of nowhere. The place was really nice, had a large concrete stairway flanked by water fountains that led down to the altar area, so the bride could be seen by all like she was ascending from heaven. The ceremony begins and the bridal party come down and take their places. Then the bride appears with her father. She takes 3 or 4 steps down the concrete steps and her shoe twists on her. She tumbled down a good 12 feet or more and busted out the majority of her front teeth in the fall. So much blood all over her. With the place being so isolated, it took a good 40 minutes for ambulance to arrive, and she was in intense pain. Ultimately she was okay, and I got an email from them weeks later with the rescheduled date. This time there was no stairs anywhere in sight. Poor girl. I bet that was expensive. The new teeth, I mean, what is a story you wanted to tell, but you can't just find the right time? I used to work in a fairly bad environment a few years back. It had started to rain when I was walking home from work, and I didn't have an umbrella. There was no shelter from the rain nearby and the crossing was red. So I just stood there, soaking wet, wishing I could be at home. A couple of inebriated middle-aged men approached, waiting to cross the street. Obviously I was scared and avoided looking at them in case they became rowdy, because they were clearly. But one of the men gave me his umbrella after looking at me. "Your skull is more valuable than mine," he stated when I tried to decline. Then the light turned green, and he stumbled forward, sharing an umbrella with a pal. It was a small but really kind gesture that made me feel important. I still have the umbrella, and I'll never forget how a drunk, elderly man lifted my spirits during a difficult period. I also hope he didn't regret losing the umbrella after he regained consciousness. It was a very fine one. What is one thing that you will never do again? Pilot a private aircraft. I discovered at age 14 that I could get a pilot's license. I joined a local flying club and started the lessons. Several weeks of ground school, then into the planes. Our training club owned 3 old Cessna 150s. 2-seaters. We plotted our course for our first training flight. Mind you, I was 6 feet 3 inches and over 330 pounds. The gross lift weight of the 150 was around 600 pounds. I barely fit in the cockpit. We took off and followed the local state road to our destination. About 20 minutes into the flight, my door popped open. There was nothing between me and the state road except for about 3,000 feet of altitude. I gazed down and watched as semi-trucks were passing us. We landed, I called my dad to come and get me, and I never went back. Within a few years, I had learned that one by one, the instructors I had were killed in one crash or another. I knew I made the right decision to get out of it. What is something bad you have done with no regrets? We had a high school biology teacher that absolutely hated students. Of course some of us were horrible people, but she hated every student in every single class from what all the other students were saying. Near the final, she took all of her sick/leave days at once in a 2-week period when she was supposed to be prepping us, or helping us get ready for it. Well, one day when doing a report for everyone at the front of the class, I noticed her password was April 26. I assume it was her birthday. After we took the final and there were those last few days of class, she again didn't show up, and we didn't even have a substitute. So I logged onto her account from the classroom and I changed everyone's grade who got a D or lower into random B's and C's. She did not work at the school the next year. Okay, I might actually have a few regrets about this now that I'm writing it out. That was criminal as fuck. Well, luckily I dropped out of school, so those grades didn't matter, and I joined the army a few years later. What was a moment in your childhood looking back thinking, yeah, I could have died, should be dead? When I was about 8, I lived 5 houses down from my best friend. She wasn't answering my calls, so I decided to bike down to her house. It was a straight shot from mine. She ended up not being home and I turned around and biked back. Like I said, it's a straight shot, so I look around and study the houses on the way back. I look over to my left, a car rushes in the driveway and a guy jumps out and starts banging on the door for his mother, shouting that someone is going to kill him. That lasts about 2 seconds before another car drives into the yard, knocking over vases and almost hitting the actual house. It was blaring music and huge dude jumps out and holds a gun to the dude's head. Says something about having his money. The dude gets back in his car and does a U-turn, almost hits me, stops the car and pointed the gun at me and asked me what the hell I thought I was doing. An 8-year-old girl. I flew home scared out of my mind, left my bike in the yard and ran inside. I never told my family what happened. What's a time where you should have died, but you survived by sheer luck? After I found out my fiancé was cheating on me, I went out drinking. I was a pretty heavy alcoholic at that point. I got really drunk at a bar, went to a hotel room, blacked out and woke up in a drainage ditch. I then crossed a 4-lane highway Frogger style. Went into a restaurant and asked for a coffee. They called the police as I was running through the parking lot. The police stopped me and told me they had to give me a breathalyzer to make sure I was okay, even though I wasn't driving. I blew a .32. The cop said, "You should be in a coma or dead. I don't know how you're standing here arguing with me." I said, "This is a normal Saturday, just drive me home." He said, "Well, first of all is Tuesday and second of all you need to go to the hospital." I ended up pissing off the entire nursing staff after I vomited on the floor. The ER doctor told me the next morning that I needed to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and get sober. I stayed sober for about 6 months and then went back out for another few years. Today I have over 4 years sober. What's the dumbest way you've injured your genitals? I, as a 15-year-old, hated gym class. To my chagrin, it was the yearly running of the mile, but I was determined to make somewhat of an effort. About 2 laps in, I start feeling an uncomfortable pull on my pubic hair. But what can you do? Not like the gym teacher was going to let me leave and go back to the locker room. So I keep jogging/speed walking, as the pain gets progressively worse to the point of almost being numb. Finally my torture ended. I was able to go to the locker room and see WTF was going on. I get into the bathroom stall and I'm dumbfounded. My poor virgin pubic hair, never trimmed, never shaved, had become completely entangled in the spandex lining of my pink Playboy bunny thong. And I mean a lot of it. I stayed in the stall until my classmates left for their next classes. I had no scissors. No friends to ask for scissors. So, I ripped the band-aid. I cried. There was blood. And have remained clean-shaven by choice since. Lol. What's the most effed up thing someone has told you about themselves after barely getting to know them? Was in a bar in Tokyo and another foreigner started chatting me up. There were a few girls who we talked to, but nothing was really happening. He had some suggestions for other places to drink, so we took a train up to Shibuya. On the way he decided, unprompted, to let me know the girl at the last bar said she was 23, but was probably lying, which made me internally freak out and happy we got out of there. But he followed up with, "Yeah, she was probably 27 or so, which is way too old for me," setting the stage. This guy was white and looked 30-ish, balding and with a gut. Spoke fluent Japanese, so he was super confident chatting up random girls. I asked why 27 was too old. He was older than her, right? He followed up with, "Yeah, I usually try to meet girls under 20. Preferably teenagers. I've hooked up with a few of my high school students. Younger the better." I didn't even answer, just got myself lost in the crowd once we got off the train at Shibuya Station and never saw the guy again. What's the weirdest thing you've seen happen at a friend's house that they thought was normal? I celebrated Christmas with my HS girlfriend's family one year. It was her mother's turn to open her presents, and she opened one from her daughter, then one from her other daughter, then finally one from her husband. Then her husband started pulling tiny hidden gifts for his wife from everywhere: earrings from the couch cushions, necklaces, bracelets, a bag of candy, and flowers. He had at least a dozen presents hidden everywhere, from behind the curtains, in a lampshade, behind the TV, in a closet. They just kept coming, and he had the biggest grin on his face. When he was done, he wished her a Merry Christmas, told her he loved her, and kissed her right on the mouth in front of me. It was wonderful but extremely weird to me. It wasn't until that display of love and joy for his wife that I realized I had never once seen my own parents act the least bit affectionate towards each other. That I had never heard them say "I love you" to each other. That's when I realized it was my family that was weird. What's one thing that happened in your school life that you'll never forget? The time we made pizza. Our teacher had just walked out of the room and we had just put our pizzas in the ovens. About 5 minutes after we put the pizzas in the ovens, somebody said, "It smells burnt in here." Of course, everyone checked their ovens. I looked as well. in our oven, and there's no pizza anymore. Instead, there's a hellfire oven plate. We take it out and just throws it in the sink. Still on fire. So we turn on the sink and smoke starts building up. Fortunately for us, the fire alarm miraculously didn't go off. The classroom were below ground level but had windows right over the street outside. We threw out the burnt pizza and oven plate through the window, on the sidewalk, and cleaned up. Literally the same second as we were done cleaning, our teacher walks in. She said, "Doesn't it smell burnt in here?" Everybody immediately said no, it doesn't. She didn't even notice that a whole big as pizza were gone. Women who gave nice guys a chance, how did it work out? We dated. He was attentive and not like the other guys. He wasn't my type really, but I had been dating people who genuinely treated me poorly, and I thought it was time I made a more mature decision and dated someone with a job, who respected me, etc. He proposed super fast. I married him. Fast forward, he slowly became the most abusive person I have ever known, demanding that I devolve into his slave. He was addicted to porn, weed, video games, and believed he was not like other guys. He was special, according to him. He was more honest, smarter, etc. than anyone in the world, and I didn't appreciate him enough. I became a prisoner in my own home. He controlled all the money in my social life. I was miserable. One day he physically attacked me, basically a coercive/physical rape attempt, and I fled my home in panic fear. He sent me a manifesto email telling me that unless I can submit 100% to his complete sexual control at all times, I was not to come home, to the house we own together. We're divorced now. Doctors have read it. What's it like when you go in for a doctor's appointment? Do you and your doctor discuss what's wrong with you like it's a group project? Do you not go at all because you're your own doctor? I was at a lecture a couple of years ago, performed by two doctors who'd undergone treatment for breast cancer and written a book about it together. I remember her talking about her diagnosis. She was a breast cancer surgeon herself, you couldn't make it up. She walked into the room, saw her own scans with the doctor, and her heart dropped. She barely heard a word he said because she couldn't stop the flood of information she was getting. Looking at the scan, she knew if she'd need surgery, chemo, radiotherapy, how long it would be, what her estimated survival was. I don't think they discussed it like a group project, but I suppose she couldn't stop herself from listening to her own internal monologue since it was her own field. I remember her saying she'd found it, in hindsight, an incredible learning opportunity regarding how to interact with patients, and that she thought about it a lot. Have you ever been drunk or high and came up with this truly amazing idea but then became sober and realized it wasn't as amazing as you thought it was? If so, what was the idea? Imagine Discord online voice chat. My idea was that you could create subrooms within the current channel. My thought process was, I want to have a conversation with one person but still want to kind of hear what my other friends are conversing about with other people in the channel, but I don't want their conversation to interrupt my conversation and vice versa. So my thinking was that you join like a sub-channel where everyone in that sub-channel is at 100% volume and everyone else in the parent channel is at like 30% volume. So you could all be in the same parent channel but not really be a hindrance to one another, but you could still sort of hear them if you wanted to. It seems like a good idea if you're high, but then you realize it's just kind of pointless lol. I thought I was onto a massive breakthrough. Edit. Well, this went mental. The people have spoken Discord. Make it happen.